From our Toronto studios, this is Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I am Ahmed Ramadan. CAIR urges emergency mosque security funds after San Diego attack. This and more on today's show. Stay tuned. The U.S. House of Representatives has honored the victims of the deadly San Diego attack by holding a moment of silence. Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs said she was speaking with a heavy heart to remember Amin Abdullah, Mansour Kazahi, and Nadir Awad. The three victims were killed after two teenage gunmen opened fire at the mosque complex Monday. Jacobs says the incident is an attack on religious freedom, diversity, and pluralism in America. The Congresswoman says it is the result of rising Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. She says the Islamic Center is a place of peace and safety for the community. Despite this, she says the mosque had faced hate speech and vandalism for decades. Jacobs praised the victims for trying to stop the attackers and protect worshippers. She says San Diego's community would face this hateful attack with unity and compassion. Here is a special report by Saleh Farouk about the rising Islamophobic speech in America.
Social media was supposed to connect people, to bring the world closer, to make strangers familiar. But somewhere along the way, it became a tool to spread hatred and violence. And Muslims have become one of the easiest targets of social media hate campaigns across the world. In just 1 year, more than 4.72 million Islamophobic posts flooded social media in the United States alone. It was not random. It was not isolated. It was a well-coordinated anti-Muslim campaign. It didn't just appear overnight. It was built, funded, organized, amplified, backed by well-funded networks, including pro-Israel lobbying and digital influence campaigns that have invested millions into shaping anti-Muslim narratives. Influencers, troll accounts, verified voices, all repeating the same message. Hate mongers kept repeating one phrase: Muslim invasion, a conspiracy repeated so often it begins to sound like truth. Trolls accused Muslims of invading America, even though Muslims make up less than 2% of the population. This isn't new. Islamophobia in America didn't begin today. It didn't begin with the September 11 attacks. But social media changed something. It didn't just host hate, it amplified it, turning whispers into a chorus. And then those voices changed. They weren't just anonymous trolls anymore. They were elected officials. More than 45 Republican officials, many backed by pro-Israel lobbying networks, kept producing, amplifying, repeating Islamophobic narratives, not as fringe rhetoric, but as a strategy. Calls to ban Muslim immigration, attempts to label Muslim rights groups like CAIR as terrorist entities, policies designed to erase visibility, no Arabic street names, no Muslim institutions without suspicion, no space without scrutiny. A Muslim housing project near Dallas was labeled as Sharia City, a claim pushed by far-right voices and amplified by powerful people like Governor Greg Abbott. A single post turning fear into narrative. And once a narrative takes hold, it spreads into timelines, into debates, into policy rooms. Even Muslim lawmakers weren't spared. Zoran Mamdani, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, all targeted, all labeled jihadi and terrorists. Not for what they did, but for who they are. But this wasn't online anymore, because this is where it gets darker. At least 6 bills were sponsored or co-sponsored by Republicans across both chambers of Congress in less than 1 year, all referencing one word, Sharia, a term repeated 528 times, nearly half of all posts studied. Almost 1 in 3 posts linking Muslims to terrorism. 1 in 5 pushing a deeper claim that Islam itself is incompatible with the West. It was framed as a clash of civilizations. Western civilization versus Islam, or Judeo-Christian values versus Muslim identity. Some even went as far as calling it a crusade. And then they institutionalized it. A Sharia-free America caucus was formed. It began with a social media post. Then it became a narrative. Then it became policy. And outside the screen, the impact grows. Complaints rise. Fear spreads. In 1 year alone, 8,683 cases of Islamophobia reported nationwide, the highest ever recorded by the Council on American Islamic Relations. From Texas to Florida to Illinois, a state ruled by Democrats was on the 2nd spot in the list. And hate doesn't stay online. It travels from screens to streets to systems. And then it turns into violence. Because violence doesn't begin with killing, it begins with words.
We have to bear in mind that words kill. Words kill as bullets.
And when words are weaponized long enough, they don't just spread hate, they make violence inevitable.
America's largest Muslim civil rights group is demanding urgent federal action after the deadly shooting at a mosque in San Diego. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, is calling for immediate access to security grants for Muslim organizations. In a letter to the Department of Homeland Security, CAIR says many Muslim groups have been unfairly denied funding during the previous DHS leadership. The group warns that mosques and Islamic centers remain vulnerable as anti-Muslim attacks continue across the United States. CAIR cited cases of planned mass shootings, arson attacks, bomb threats, and violent assaults targeting Muslim communities. The demand comes 3 days after a deadly shooting at the Islamic Center of San Diego. Police are investigating the shooting as a possible hate crime which occurred days before Eid al-Adha and the annual Hajj pilgrimage. New details have emerged in the deadly shooting at the Islamic Center of San Diego. Investigators say the teenage attackers live-streamed the massacre while online viewers watched in real time. CBS News reports that at least 3 people watched the attack live through Signal and Discord video calls. On a Signal video call, the perpetrators were in touch with a user identified as Noel before and during the attack. The recordings show Noel had been on the call with the gunman for roughly 20 minutes before they began shooting. One viewer repeatedly urged another person to call the police, but it remains unclear if anyone alerted authorities in time. The 2 gunmen killed 3 worshippers inside the mosque complex on Monday. Authorities say 17-year-old Kane Clark then shot 18-year-old Caleb Vasquez before killing himself. Police say they found Islamophobic literature and extremist slogans written on the attackers' weapons. The FBI says in a disturbing manifesto, the attackers praised the 2019 Christchurch mosque killer in New Zealand who murdered 51 Muslims during a live-streamed attack. Discord says it has preserved evidence and is cooperating with law enforcement. Signal has declined to comment. The Democratic Party's post-election report on its recent defeat does not include the Biden administration's direct funding and political backing of the Gaza genocide. The omission has drawn sharp criticism from progressives and party insiders. Many members believe the administration's failure to stop the genocide in Gaza was a major reason for the Democrats' election loss. Congressman Ro Khanna is slamming the 192-page report. In a video posted on X, Khanna says Democrats lost support because of a blank check for Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Khanna says voters in Michigan and Wisconsin repeatedly raised concerns over U.S. backing for Israel's genocide in Gaza. Former DNC Vice Chair David Hogg says turning a blind eye to the suffering of Palestinians led to heavy losses for Democrats among younger voters. The Biden administration approved nearly $18 billion in military aid for Israel during the genocide. The stance triggered anger among progressive voters and activists. A new investigation has raised allegations of corruption in the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. A report by the outlet More Perfect Union reveals the Department of Homeland Security paid massive prices for warehouses. These were later converted into immigrant detention centers. Investigators say some properties were bought for up to 10 times their market value. One warehouse in Texas, valued at $11 million, was reportedly purchased by ICE for $123 million. Another in Arizona was bought for more than $70 million, despite being valued at less than $12 million. The report says many of the purchased properties were linked to financial firms with ties to President Donald Trump and his allies. Investigative journalist Michael Riston says people close to the White House pushed the plan to rescue failing properties using taxpayer money. The Trump administration denies any wrongdoing. A fresh legal and military clash is brewing over the Strait of Hormuz as the White House vows to block joint efforts by Iran and Oman to formalize maritime service fees through their sovereign territorial waters. While President Trump is labeling the proposed fees as illegal tolls on an international passage, regional analysts note that the shipping lanes physically cross the national waters of Muscat and Tehran, directly challenging Washington's legal authority to intervene. Trump says the U.S. blockade in the region is 100% effective, calling it a steel wall. He also vows the U.S. would take control of Iran's highly enriched uranium under any future deal, restricting Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. The comments come after some Western media outlets have reported that Tehran and Muscat are exploring maritime service fees. Tensions have remained high since the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran in February. Iran retaliated with attacks on Israel and U.S. assets in the Gulf and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. U.S.-Iran deal appears closer as Pakistani army chief heads to Tehran. Details coming up next. Welcome back. A possible U.S.-Iran agreement appears closer as Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir heads to Tehran for high-level talks. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says there has been slight progress and a little bit of movement in negotiations with Iran. Rubio has confirmed Pakistan is now the main mediator between Washington and Tehran. He is praising Islamabad for doing an admirable job to prevent a wider regional war. Meanwhile, Iran says it is reviewing a new U.S. proposal. Iranian media reports Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with Pakistani Interior Minister Mohsen Naqvi to discuss the proposal terms. Tehran is demanding sanctions relief, release of frozen assets, and an end to restrictions on its ports. The talks focus heavily on the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important oil shipping route. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says 35 ships crossed the waterway in the last 24 hours with Tehran's permission. The New York Times says it stands by its decision to publish a report detailing sexual violence by Israeli forces and settlers against Palestinians, despite political pressure to remove it. Over the past weeks, the newspaper has faced attacks from the Israeli government and pro-Israel groups. The column by Nicholas Kristof gave voice to Palestinian men and women who described horrific abuse in Israeli prisons and the occupied West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was quick to call the report blood libel and threaten legal action against the newspaper. But the editorial team says the story passed a rigorous fact-checking process. Kristof says journalists cannot stay silent when victims speak out about rape and torture. He says ignoring such allegations would mean abandoning basic human rights principles. The report has triggered protests outside the newspaper's headquarters in New York by Jewish and Israeli lobby groups. Rights advocates say the pressure is to silence reporting on Palestinian suffering amid the ongoing Gaza genocide. Evidence has emerged that Israeli forces sexually abused, tortured, and humiliated activists aboard the Gaza-bound aid flotilla. The ships were intercepted in international waters and activists were detained by Israeli forces. After the release, they narrated harrowing tales to the media in Istanbul. They described beatings, abuse, and degraded treatment in Israeli custody. New Zealand activist Musa Tahir says Israeli soldiers recognized him from an earlier flotilla mission. He says soldiers stripped him and then restrained him with plastic zip ties so tightly that he cried in pain. Tahir says soldiers stepped on his hand, pressed a boot onto his face, and beat him unconscious aboard the prison-like ship. He says detainees were forced to crawl on the ground in order to humiliate them. Tahir showed the injuries on his face and leg he encountered while being detained. Mauritian activist Islamophobia says Israeli forces repeatedly struck detainees. He says several activists suffered broken ribs. Despite the ordeal, he says activists will continue sailing aid ships towards Gaza with food and medicine. All madrasas in the eastern state of West Bengal will sing a Hindu nationalist song in the morning school assemblies. The order has been issued by the recently elected Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party government in the province. This comes despite the song Vande Mataram containing several objectionable stanzas that are against Islamic beliefs. The order applies to both government-funded and privately run Islamic seminaries. Authorities defend the move, saying it would promote patriotism and national unity. On the other hand, Muslim groups and religious scholars say the Hindu nationalist song is being imposed on Islamic religious institutions. They say the song describes the nation as a mother goddess figure. It is almost like a hymn praising and seeking help from Hindu gods, which is against Islamic beliefs. They say they will challenge the order in court. West Bengal is home to one of India's largest Muslim populations and thousands of madrasa students. Critics say the move is part of a wider effort by India's Hindu nationalist movement to reshape secular institutions around majoritarian religious symbolism. A historic moment on Mount Everest unfolded as the first Afghan woman has climbed the world's highest mountain. Zakiya Ahmed summited the 8,848-meter peak yesterday morning. Ahmed is known by her nickname River. The human rights advocate is an Afghan refugee residing in Australia. She climbed alongside Nepali guides Dawa Tenzing Sherpa and Furba Giljan Sherpa. Supporters say her climb sends a powerful message to women refugees and displaced communities around the world. A Pakistani climber, Salman Atiki, also successfully summited Everest the same day. The Alpine Club of Pakistan says the achievement of both climbers is being celebrated as a symbol of courage and resilience. Mount Everest is located in the Himalayas between Nepal and Tibet and is one of the most treacherous peaks of the world. The extreme altitude and harsh weather make it a challenge for climbers to reach the summit. That's all from our Toronto studios. Thank you for watching Muslim News. We're a community channel dedicated to bringing you stories you can trust. Please like, share, and subscribe to our content. You can also comment to let us know what you think of our coverage. You can donate now by visiting muslimnetwork.tv/donate. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV. Salam.